This video has been sponsored by Squarespace. I don't know if the term YA actually means anything these days. I mean, obviously it stands for young adult, but what is that? A young adult could be anywhere from the ages of 13 to 25, and with the popularization of things like the romantasy genre, which oftentimes gets lumped into YA because of its young protagonists, the term YA could pretty much mean anything. It is not a useful term. But in my opinion, that doesn't make it meaningless. If we set the general salesmanship buffoonery of the concept of genre aside for a little while, YA, in my opinion, should be the kind of story that helps show a young person the path towards becoming an adult. And my favorite example of good YA is Terry Pratchett's Tiffany Aching books. Using the familiar format of the fairy tale, this sub-series establishes the skills that young people should develop. It explores the fears, dangers, and pitfalls that can be found in growing up, and it provides a kind of comfort for the young, confused mind that only fantasy is capable of. Just a quick warning that this video is going to contain spoilers for the entirety of the Tiffany Aching series, including The Shepherd's Crown. However, if you have not read The Shepherd's Crown, I will be putting a timestamp up here if you want to skip over the explicit plot details of that book, just in case. And speaking of just in case you are sitting here right before watching this video thinking to yourself, I need to build a spectacular website, I'm going to tell you about this video's sponsor, Squarespace. Squarespace is the all-in-one website building platform that's going to help you stand out and succeed online. You can get your website discovered fast with Squarespace's integrated SEO tools. Every one of their websites is optimized to be indexed with meta descriptions, an auto-generated sitemap, and more. All the things that you need to show up on search engines and bring in new customers. And with Squarespace's cutting-edge design tools, anyone can build themselves a perfectly customized website. Start with one of their professionally designed website templates or with their Blueprint AI website builder, and use their intuitive drag and drop technology to create a website that beautifully matches your brand and style. And you can keep track of how all of this is going with Squarespace's intuitive built-in analytics tools. You can review your website traffic, figure out where to focus your engagement, and track your revenue all in one place. If you're interested in revamping an existing brand or building a completely new one, Squarespace is the place to do it. You can head down to squarespace.com for a completely free trial, and when you're ready to launch, go to squarespace.com/JessOfTheShire to get 10% off your first purchase of a website or domain. Thank you so much to Squarespace for sponsoring this video and supporting the channel, and thanks to all of you for checking out my sponsors. Most of Terry Pratchett's books are technically for adults, but I'd say that's mostly because they are packed full of references that kids are unlikely to get or find funny. However, with most of these books, there's nothing that a child couldn't read. Terry Pratchett self-admittedly could not and did not write explicitly sexual things in his books, and the themes may be dark, but they are really appropriately and well handled by the books. And so there's nothing in there that I don't think a kid could read. But that raises the question, in books like the Tiffany Aching books, where they are clearly young adult books, what changes in Terry Pratchett's writing? According to Sir Terry, I think that our job is to turn children into adults, not encourage children to remain children. So these books were written with the express purpose not just to entertain, but also to educate, to arm young people with the tools that they will need in order to become adults. And for Tiffany Aching, the protagonist of this young adult series, these tools are critical thinking, responsibility, and personal identity. Unfortunately, a child is unlikely to sit very still through a very serious lecture on the importance of responsibility, and so Terry Pratchett employs a familiar tactic. He uses the format of fantasy to draw his readers in, both utilizing and subverting familiar tropes in order to get his message across. This is arguably something that all of Terry Pratchett's books do. They use parody and satire to take a closer look at societal issues and pop culture and what have you, but for his children's books, Terry Pratchett uses what is most likely going to be familiar to them, fairy tales. The books within the Tiffany Aching subseries of Discworld are deceptively simple when it comes to the plot. They introduce a monster, and then they defeat that monster. But by creating monsters that embody the very real and particular fears that are uniquely threatening to children, and by forcing Tiffany to overcome these monsters through personal growth and discovery, Pratchett leaves the door open for children to come out of the stories a lot wiser than when they went in. And they can have a lot of fun along the way, too. The first monster that Tiffany Aching faces is just a little taste of what's to come, but it does a really great job of introducing her character. One day, while sitting by a creek, she sees a dark spot in the water begin to bubble and shift, and she jumps out of the way just in time to avoid being snatched by this snarling green monster, dripping with creek water with huge eyes and huge teeth. When the monster retreats, Tiffany very promptly gathers up her baby brother, who is also sitting by the creek, and hurries home to do a bit of research. I'm not scared at all, she thought. How strange. I ought to be scared, but I'm just angry. I mean, I can feel the scared, like a red-hot ball, but the angry isn't letting it out. Tiffany does not start out this story as your standard helpless child protagonist that you'd usually see in fairy tales. She may only be 9 years old, but she has a clear head on her shoulders. She's clever, and she may not have the world figured out, but she has a desperate hunger to figure it out. And this characterization is so key to making her likable. Too many child protagonists are these completely blank slates at the starts of their stories. These absolute tabula rasas waiting for the coming-of-age story to imprint personality and willpower upon them. And as an adult, thinking back to what kids are like, trying to write children's literature, this might seem like a fair starting point, but it does brush over the fact that most children are human, and a lot of them are far more wise, knowledgeable, and perceptive than most stories give them credit for. Tiffany's character doesn't speak down to children, rather it meets them where they are, as fully formed people with a mind, a personality, and a unique drive of their own. As soon as Tiffany gets home, she heads to the family bookshelf to look up the monster that she just faced. She learns it's called Jenny Greenteeth, a monster of the Fae lurking in the deep waters with eyes the size of soup plates, waiting to drag children off to the watery depths. Naturally, Tiffany is the kind of person who hears that her eyes are the size of soup plates and has to go off and measure the house's soup plates to see what that actually means. A soup plate is 8 inches, by the way. Armed with knowledge, she marches back to the creek, she sets up her baby brother as bait for the monster, she bides her time, and when the monster returns, she ambushes it with the family's cast iron frying pan. This monster, although simple and easily defeated, is the perfect proving ground for Tiffany. It's a way for her to display her clear-headedness, her determination to take responsibility for things that she could just go ask someone else for help for, and it gives us a really great idea of who Tiffany is and who she's trying to become. Tiffany takes these characteristics with her into every aspect of her life, for both good and bad. Her clear-headedness sometimes puts her at odds with teachers who don't necessarily like how smart she is and that she might know more than them about things. Her desire to take responsibility for everything often puts her in danger. And there's a frustration that comes from the fact that although she knows exactly who she wants to be, she doesn't quite know how to get there. But when she learns that the appearance of Jenny Greenteeth is a sign of more fairy trouble to come, she immediately asks how she can stop it. Not how anyone could stop it, not who they could ask for help, but how she, Tiffany Aching, a 9-year-old girl, can stop the fairy incursion. Responsibility is a fundamental trait of Tiffany Aching. It is a knee-jerk reaction, an unavoidable part of who she is, even if it is a skill that she's going to have to continue to hone over the years. Tiffany's piercing critical thinking also allows her to deflate the layers of story around her. She knows very well how stories can lie, and the power that they have. If they call someone a wicked witch, they don't have to explain why the witch is so wicked. Most readers will take that for granted. And Tiffany is also aware of how these larger stories that exist within society can impact her. Her hair was brown, plain brown. Her mother called it chestnut or sometimes auburn, but Tiffany knew it was brown, 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 just like her eyes, brown as earth. And did the book have any adventures for people who had brown eyes and brown hair? No, no, no. It was the blonde people with blue eyes and the redheads with green eyes who got the stories. If you had brown hair, you were probably just a servant or a woodcutter or something, or a dairymaid. Well, that was not going to happen even if she was good at cheese. She couldn't be the prince, and she'd never be a princess, and she didn't want to be a woodcutter, so she'd be the witch, and she'd know things. From the very start of the story, Tiffany has an idea of who it is that she wants to be. After all, she has the example of her own Granny Aching, the shepherd of all shepherds. Granny Aching was a woman who lived up alone on a hill caring for her flock of sheep, but she was very rarely alone just because of how many people came to her for help, whether it was for medicine for sick sheep, or to solve land disputes, or to help put the baron of their country in his place. Granny Aching was the person that you went to fix things. She is the one who looked after everyone on the chalk who could not look after themselves, from the poorest person to the most lost sheep. Although she may not have ever known it, she was a witch in all but name. And with her having recently died at the beginning of the first book, Tiffany is determined to take her place. While the main villain of this first book, which is called The Wee Free Men, is the Fairy Queen, I would say that the monster is change. In this book, Tiffany is on the precipice of so many changes. Her granny has just died, she is no longer a kid, and although she tries to keep a cool head, Tiffany is struggling with just how much the world is changing around her and how much she is changing. It's hard to grow up. Although she is working and moving towards it, she is not yet who she and the rest of the world wants her to be. Her society would have her be a milkmaid, a mother, or a servant, but Tiffany knows that she'd never be happy doing that. Her family wants her to dote upon and adore her sticky little brother Wentworth, but she doesn't feel like she loves him in the way that she's supposed to. And Tiffany desperately wants to be a witch, but for now she is just a little girl in a blue dress. And the Fairy Queen lays yet more expectations on top of her. The Fairy Queen wants every child to remain a child, locked into sugary stasis, stuffed with sweets, and never challenged to be anything more than a weeping baby. She wants to trap people in dreams, to fool them with a fake vision of what the world should and could be. She wants to convince them that the easy way is the right way. But time and time again, Tiffany's critical thinking is able to save her. She knows that the idea of never changing seems appealing, but it is a bitter poison. Tiffany is changing and will continue to change, and she can either run away from that, she can suppress it and push it down and try and stay the same, or she can harness that, and she can make that change her power. So what if she finds her brother annoying? If she feels like she doesn't love him enough, or the way that she's supposed to love him? She loves him in the way that she loves him. She charges into fairyland to save him, and that kind of radical responsibility is her version of love. When she confronts the Fairy Queen, she thinks, "This creature was trying to take her world." All witches are selfish, the Queen had said. But Tiffany's third thought said, "Then turn selfishness into a weapon. Make all things yours. Make other lives and dreams and hopes yours. Protect them, save them, bring them into the sheepfold, walk the gale for them, keep away the wolf. My dreams, my brother, my family, my land, my world. How dare you try to take these things, because they are mine. I have a duty. The anger overflowed. The Queen's final desperate effort is to try and punch holes in Tiffany's ironclad sense of self. It's so sad, she continued. You dream that you are strong, sensible, logical, the kind of person who always has a bit of string. But that's just your excuse for not being really properly human. You're just a brain. No heart at all. You didn't even cry when Granny Aching died. You think too much, and now your precious thinking has let you down. But by the end, Tiffany can see through that. She didn't cry when Granny Aching died, because Granny Aching was never really gone. She lives on in the land, in the memories that she created with people. She lives on in Tiffany, in the things that Tiffany learned from her, in the person that Tiffany will one day become. Tiffany recalls when she was really little, and she'd run across the hills, shouting commands to Granny Aching's great sheepdogs, Thunder and Lightning. She was getting the commands all wrong, but it didn't matter, because the sheepdogs listened, because behind her was standing Granny Aching. With the power of her grandmother and the power of the land beneath her feet, Tiffany summons up the power of the storm and chases the Queen out of her land with thunder and lightning. Now I know why I never cried for Granny, she said. She has never left me. She leaned down and sentries bent with her. The secret is not to dream, she whispered. The secret is to wake up. Waking up is harder. I have woken up, and I am real. I know where I come from, and I know where I'm going. You cannot fool me anymore, or touch me, or anything that is mine. The We Free Men establishes and tests who Tiffany is, and the way in which she goes about the world, and it leaves her so much stronger. But the incredible thing about these books is that she still has so much to learn. A Hatful of Sky sees Tiffany leaving her precious comfort zone of the chalk to train in witchcraft up in the hills. While she wanted to learn magic, to fly around on a broom, and to learn spells that help people, she quickly finds out that spells aren't quite as useful as just plain old elbow grease, that flying makes her nauseous, and that magic is oftentimes most effective when you don't use magic at all. Her witch mentor, Miss Level, explains that most of their days are actually spent going around to houses, bandaging up injuries, helping with chores, delivering babies. They act as the glue for the community, picking up the pieces that get left behind, and they never ask for anything in return, aside from, old clothes and maybe a spare jar of pickles. And Tiffany sees all this, and she thinks it's unfair. Why is she the one who's having to go to this old man's house and clip his toenails? Where are his kids or his wife? Why aren't they doing this for him? She tells Miss Level, it shouldn't be like this. Miss Level replies, there isn't a way things should be. There's just what happens, and what we do. Although Tiffany was able to ride through with her inherent knowledge and book smarts in the We Free Men, she's quickly learning that she might not be quite as much of a natural-born witch as she previously thought. She struggles with even the most basic of spells. The other young witches think she's a country bumpkin, and no one is teaching her in the way that she personally thinks that she should be taught. And this very childlike but very real frustration is what lets the monster in. The Hiver is a monster that latches onto people and takes over their minds by promising to give them exactly what they want. It's a twisted fairy godmother, and when it gets a hold of Tiffany, it gives her all of the things that the poor, too smart for her own good, kind of bullied child could possibly want to keep her safe. Tiffany now has the audacity to say whatever she wants, no matter how cruel or hurtful it may be. She has the boldness to demand the money that she thinks she's owed. She goes and buys the giant skyscraper black pointy hat, rather than wearing the invisible one that Granny Weatherwax had given her. She has enough raw magical talent to turn a man into a frog, and when she's really pushed, she has the power to kill anyone who challenges her innate wisdom. The only way that they're able to bring Tiffany's mind back to the forefront is by bringing her the familiar smells of home, sheep wool, and tobacco, a reminder of who she really is and who she wants to be, and that gives her the strength to push the hiver out of her mind. But the hiver is not gone. And here's where the real challenge kicks in, because even though her mistakes are understandable, and even though we're all allowed to make mistakes, and the ones that she has made are reasonable, she still does have to deal with the consequences of her actions. She is a witch. In The We Free Men, when she goes out and saves her brother, that is a heroic act of radical responsibility. That was not a situation that was her fault, and yet she took responsibility and she fixed what was wrong. But this is a situation that is her fault. She left herself open to the hiver. She made this mistake, and it turns out that responsibility is a bit more difficult to take on when it is not freely chosen, but thrust upon you. While possessed by the hiver, Tiffany did a lot of terrible things. I mean, she literally killed half of a person. But perhaps the most awful thing that she did is she took the money of an old man. An old man who was specifically saving up this amount of money to pay for his funeral. An old man who was saving up that money to pay for his funeral because he had no family or friends left. An old man that Tiffany has been taking care of, and every day he has asked her to bring out the chest of money so that he can look at it and make sure it's still there. And Tiffany took that money to buy herself a fancy cloak. And now she has to face the music. She opened the gate and walked up the path. You couldn't say, "It's not my fault." You couldn't say, "It's not my responsibility." You could say, "I will deal with this." You didn't have to want to, but you had to do it. Tiffany is beginning to learn just how hard it is to be a witch and an adult. She has to rediscover who she is now that she is so far out of her comfort zone and so far away from home, and now that she's made this mistake. But she finally figures out the next piece of the puzzle as she steps through the gates of night, ready to escort the hiver into death. Since the hiver never truly lived, it's not sure how to die. It's not sure who it is. It's just an amalgamation of all of the creatures and humans it has consumed. It's a melting pot of souls and goals, of minds and perspectives. But, as Tiffany realizes, the same could be said about us. We are history. Everything we've ever been on the way to becoming us, we still are. Would you like the rest of the story? I'm made up of the memories of my parents and grandparents, all my ancestors. They're in the way I look, in the color of my hair, and I'm made up of everyone I've ever met who's changed the way I think. So, who is me? The hiver moves on to the next world, and Tiffany has made right what she made go wrong. And A Hat Full of Sky does a really good job of proving just how far Tiffany still has to go. Although she is wise, perceptive, and sure of herself, every child is going to have doubts. Every child is going to make mistakes, and those mistakes don't make them an irreparably bad or ruined person. But they do have to take responsibility and ownership for those mistakes, because that's the only way that you truly grow. In Wintersmith, Tiffany gets an even more rude awakening about what it means to grow up. She's been paired with a new mentor, Miss Treason, and she's still struggling under the weight of being a witch in training. One dark autumn night, Miss Treason drags Tiffany out in the woods to be witness to a secret ritual. It is a gathering of spirits, a dance to welcome in the coming winter. It is the Dark Morris Dance. And Miss Treason's only command or explanation to Tiffany is that she must not join the dance. But as Tiffany watches, entranced by the beauty and cosmic importance, she realizes that there's one dancer missing. The dance is incomplete. She reasons to herself. Miss Treason had said no, but that had been a long time ago. And how could Miss Treason understand? What could she know? When did she last dance? The dance was in Tiffany's bones now, calling to her. 6 dancers were not enough. She ran forward and jumped into the dance. Sucked in by all-powerful narrativium, Tiffany is slotted into an age-old story. She has stepped into the role of the summer lady, and now the great winter god, the Wintersmith, has fallen in love with her. This is the first time Tiffany's encountered real romance, and suffice it to say, it is an unsettling experience. She's both horrified and secretly delighted by the Wintersmith's attention, as he does more and more elaborate gestures to try and get her attention. He draws her on frosty window panes all over the country. He creates a blizzard of snowflakes, each one with a tiny image of Tiffany's face, and he creates an entire iceberg that looks like her. And as the Wintersmith sets about making himself human so that he can finally be with Tiffany, she finds herself paralyzed by indecision. She's got a clear enough head to recognize that everything that's going on is wrong. She's not the summer lady. She doesn't want to be fallen in love with by this immortal god creature. She's a witch, for God's sake. But she's also a 12, almost 13-year-old girl, and she can't help but find herself a little bit swayed by these elaborate romantic gestures. After all, this is her first true romantic suitor. She is right on the cusp of adulthood, and she's struggling between being a witch and being a woman. At the same time, from Miss Treason, she's learning the art of artifice, or Bafo as they call it. The only reason that the people of the village respect and fear Miss Treason, who's really just a blind little old lady, is because she's bought a whole load of fake spiderwebs, bubbly black cauldrons, and fake skulls from a shop in Ankh-Morpork called Bafo's Emporium, where you can mail order spookier objects. And this seems to go against everything that Tiffany has learned about witchcraft. Her mentor and idol, the head witch, Granny Weatherwax, is strictly against any kind of frillery and frou-frou when it comes to witchcraft. The only reason that she wears the big black hat is because it's aerodynamic, and the reason that she wears black is because it hides stains really well. She doesn't think that she needs to put on appearances in order to get respect. Besides, witches have enough of a bad reputation as is. They don't exactly need to be prompting more stories to be told about them. But, as Tiffany learns, it's possible that Granny Weatherwax may not be right about everything. And appearances, or at the very least reputations, do in fact matter. Bafo made the difference. Not just the silly party stuff, but Bafo thinking, the rumors and the stories. Miss Treason had power because people thought she did. It was like the standard witch's hat. But Miss Treason was taking Bafo much, much further. Tiffany has, up until this point, resisted the urge to look like the traditional witch, you know, with the pointy black hat and the black clothes and everything. But as she's learning that it's very important to get yourself right on the inside and right with yourself, but people's perception of you plays an unignorable role in how they treat you and how they think of you. The perception of others will always have some kind of an effect on your personal identity. And if you can accept and be aware of that fact, then you can control the narratives around you. As she's coming into adulthood, Tiffany is having to learn a lot about the gray areas that she exists in. She can like and respect someone like Granny Weatherwax while also admitting that Granny Weatherwax may not know everything about everything. She can fight back against narrativium, against the way that stories dehumanize people, while also being aware of the role that narrativium has in human thought. There's a possibility that she can be a good witch and a good human being at the same time. And she may not want to be swayed by the romantic overtures of the Wintersmith, but she also cannot ignore him forever. She has foolishly stepped into the story, been drawn in by the whims of girlhood, and she can't keep running from this problem forever. Since she's failed to complete the story, winter doesn't end, and the entire world, including her beloved home of the chalk, is in danger. With sheep dying and people starving, they beg for Tiffany to come back home and help, and she realizes the true cost of her indecision. And when her baby brother goes missing in the blizzard, Tiffany knows that it is now her time to take responsibility. "This I choose to do," she croaked, her breath leaving little clouds in the air. She cleared her throat and started again. "This I choose to do. If there is a price, this I choose to pay. If it is my death, then I choose to die. Where this takes me, there I choose to go. I choose. This I choose to do." It wasn't a spell, except in her own head, but if you couldn't make spells work in your own head, you couldn't make them work at all. With her life hanging in the balance, Tiffany masters fire magic, saves her brother, and then comes face to face with the Wintersmith. And the right choice to make is the one that she chooses. She kisses the Wintersmith, and her mortal heat melts him, ending the winter at long last. Wintersmith is all about balance. Tiffany knows that she is a witch, but she is also a woman, and she has to figure out what that means for herself and for the way that people around her will perceive her. Tiffany has learned to see through the intoxicating allure of stories, to get to the truth that they hide, but she has also learned that sometimes she has to go with that story in order to get the best result. But that doesn't mean she's ever going to stop being a witch. Not even for a moment. In the end, the Summer Lady comes to visit Tiffany and to offer her a prize for her victory. Tiffany simply asks that the Summer Lady bring Summer back in, and the Summer Lady is baffled because she took down the Wintersmith. Summer is already coming back, so what prize did she want? She had saved the world from the Wintersmith after all. But Tiffany replies, "Actually, I saved it from a silly girl, Miss Summer. I put right what was wrong. One simple mistake? You'd be a silly girl not to accept a reward. I'd be a sensible young woman to refuse one," said Tiffany. And it felt good to say that. Winter is over. I know. I've seen it through. Where it took me, there I chose to go. I chose when I danced with the Wintersmith. Tiffany is learning that true responsibility and making responsible choices rarely comes with a satisfying reward or prize. Nor should it. In the words of Granny Weatherwax, if you dug the best hole, they just gave you a bigger shovel. But the really incredible thing about witches is that they just keep digging. The penultimate book in this sub-series, I Shall Wear Midnight, faces Tiffany off against the scariest monster of all, other people. It was one thing to be up in the mountains, to be a witch amongst witches, but now Tiffany is a proper witch, and she has gone back home to take over her own steading, her own piece of land, and now she has to learn how to be a witch among others. Witches were not only very busy, they were also apart. Tiffany had learned that early on. You are among people, but not the same as them. There was always a kind of distance or separation. You didn't have to work at it, it happened anyway. This wasn't just because of respect, but because of a kind of fear as well. Even though she's only 16 years old, Tiffany has taken on the responsibility of caring for the physical and emotional needs of her entire community. And the physical part she's mostly got down. She can fly without throwing up, she's become quite adept at drawing the pain out of people, and she's quite good at delivering babies. But the emotional part of it, the person-to-person thing, is something she hasn't gotten quite as good at. I'm going to issue a brief trigger warning that I'm going to be talking about domestic abuse here. Go ahead and skip about 30 seconds forward if you want to avoid that. But this all comes to a head when the community learns that a man has beat his young pregnant daughter until she lost the baby. And before Tiffany knows it, the rough music is building. It's a horde of people becoming angrier and angrier until they are ready to deal out mob justice against this man. And Tiffany doesn't know how to stop this. Much less that, she doesn't know if she should stop it. After all, this is a cruel man. This is a man who has done a terrible thing. But is he deserving of this kind of unjust justice? Because the thing is, while in this case it seems like the rough music is doing something right, there are other more morally questionable situations in which the rough music is employed. Tiffany thinks back to her childhood when the rough music fell upon the old Mrs. Snapperly. Mrs. Snapperly was a woman who had been rejected by the town for one reason or another, an old woman who smelled gross with no teeth, whose main crime was being strange and kind of annoying to have around. But this was enough that when the Baron's son went missing, the people thought that she had taken him. They thought that she was a witch, and they killed her for it. People had marched to the rough music and roughly dragged out the cracked old woman whose only crime, as far as Tiffany could see, was that she had no teeth left and smelled of wee. They had thrown stones, they had smashed windows, they had killed the cat, and all this had been done by good people, nice people, people she knew and met every day, and they had done all these things that even now they never talked about. It was a day that somehow had vanished from the calendar, and on that day, with a pocket full of charred stars, not knowing what she was doing but determined to do it, Tiffany had become a witch. And it was there, standing in the charred remains of this woman's home, the result of the rough music, that Tiffany had decided that no more people would slip between the cracks on her watch. She was going to become a witch. But, as she comes to learn, aligning yourself as the other within a community is a really dangerous place to be. Even if these are the same people that watched you grow up, the same people that raised you. She is a witch, and now that the rumble of the rough music has started, it's headed her way. As suspicions towards Tiffany and her witchcraft grow, she comes face to face with the embodiment of this monstrosity. The cunning man, a man who was wronged by a witch centuries ago, and was so filled with rage that he returns every once in a while to incite that rage into the everyday person. And of course, he's held on to a particular hatred of witches. It's quite telling that the cunning man is described as having no eyes. He represents the blindness in people, the rumination within the dark of their minds, their unseeing, uncomprehending hatred. Tiffany, by contrast, can see all too clearly. As a misunderstanding leads to her being put in jail because people think that she murdered the Baron, a man who she'd only ever helped, Tiffany thinks, I should have learned this. I wanted to learn fire and pain, but I should have learned people. As she comes to learn, some of this societally generated hatred has also managed to make its way into her. Tiffany and the Baron's son Roland had been in a kind of on-again, off-again, weird childhood crush type of relationship for all of the books up until this point, but now that has come to an end. Roland has become engaged to Letitia, who's the kind of girl that's everything that Tiffany is not. And even Tiffany, as clear-headed as she is, can't help but feel a little bit of jealousy bubbling up. Her second and third thoughts keep her from doing anything dramatic, but her emotions are going crazy at this point. She can't help that narrativium and societal pressures have kept her from seeing this human woman for who she actually is. The only way that Tiffany can overcome this is by being forced to spend time with Letitia and actually getting to know her as a person. And they clash at first, but they soon find a very particular kind of kinship. As much as Tiffany has always been a little bit bitter that she couldn't be the princess in the storybook because she was too plain and her hair was too brown, Letitia is someone who had always wanted to be a witch, but she was too blonde and too damp to ever pull that off. Tiffany and Letitia are able to come to an agreement, and perhaps even a kind of friendship, because they were able to push past the societally dictated barriers and gender roles that they've been placed into. They saw that they actually had an awful lot in common, and that both of them were thinking that the grass looked a little greener on the other side. Tiffany has learned that the only way to overcome the rage that the cunning man inspires is through community, understanding, empathy, and togetherness. In the climax, as the cunning man runs them down, Tiffany takes Letitia and Roland's hands, and by jumping through the fire, she performs their wedding rite. She has overcome her interior jealousy and prejudice and darkness because she cares about these people and she wants to do better for them. And that is the key to defeating the cunning man. She tells him, "You are what whispered in Petty's ear before he beat up his daughter. You are the first blast of the rough music. You look over the shoulder at the man as he picks up the first stone, and although I think you are a part of us all, and we will never be rid of you, we can certainly make your life hell. No mercy, no redemption. Your power is only rumors and lies," she thought. "You bore your way into people when they are uncertain and weak and worried and frightened, and they think their enemy is other people, when the enemy is and always will be you, the master of lies. Outside you are fearsome. You are nothing but weakness. Inside, I am flint." Tiffany's power doesn't come from using people, from twisting them and using them to serve her own purposes. Her power comes from being with other people, and that will always make her more powerful than the cunning man. She knows very well that he cannot be beat forever. She knows that she can't change human nature to make everyone naturally magnanimous and forward and clear thinking. But because she has rooted herself in community, she knows that she will not be the last witch that stands watch on the chalk. Standing there, grounded into her land, with a piece of flint in her hand, Tiffany banishes the cunning man from the realm of the living. She felt the heat of the whole field, steadied herself, and gripped the stone. "How dare you come here, you worm? How dare you trespass on what is mine?" She felt the flint get hotter in her hand, and then melt and flow between her fingers and drip onto the soil as she concentrated. She had never tried this before, and she took a deep breath of air that somehow the flames had cleansed. "And if you come back, cunning man, there will be another witch like me. There will always be another witch like me, because there's always going to be things like you, because we make space for them. But right now, on this bleeding piece of earth, I am the witch, and you are nothing. By the blinking of my eyes, something wicked this way dies." I Shall Wear Midnight is a powerful statement on what adulthood and leadership can look like. In so many ways, Tiffany is an untraditional adult and leader. She is a woman. She's only 16. She dresses simply. She knows a lot, but she doesn't always know what to say or what to do. But because she is willing to do the wild thing of reaching out rather than turning back in, she's able to learn a whole new definition of growing up. But her journey doesn't end there. In The Shepherd's Crown, Tiffany faces off against one final monster: loss. The Shepherd's Crown opens with Granny Weatherwax, who is the pillar of the ethos of Discworld, dying. Everyone around the disc is left reeling, especially Tiffany, who is given the responsibility of taking care of Granny's steading, which also means that she has been made the head witch. There is no head witch among witches, of course, there's no leaders, but if there was a leader, it would have been Granny Weatherwax, and now it would be Tiffany Aching. And although Tiffany certainly doesn't want this responsibility, Granny's best friend Nanny Og insists that Tiffany is the best person for the job. Nanny Og tells the other witches, "It's not about shiny charms, not about books. It's about being a witch to the bone in the darkness and dealing with the lamentation and the tears. It's about being real. Esme Weatherwax knew this with every bone in her body, and so does Tiffany Aching, and this steadin is hers." While the monster in this book is lost, the people who have gone and the people who will not return, the antidote is moving forward. The literal villain of this story is the fairies of the Wee Free Men, who've returned. They have overthrown their old fairy queen Nightshade, who was the villain of the first book, and cast her out of fairyland, and they are now being led by the far more aggressive Peaseblossom, who wants to take over the human realm. He is unwilling to accept that the land, which is now crisscrossed by railroads, by steel and iron, things that the fairies cannot take, he refuses to accept that this has made the land uninhabitable for his kind. He cannot accept that the world has moved past him. Meanwhile, Tiffany, who's not just looking after her own steading now, but also the steading of Granny Weatherwax, she's stretched thinner than ever before, and she's about to learn a whole lot more about responsibility, and the way that sometimes responsibility means asking for help. After books and books of taking on these monsters single-handedly, with absolutely no backup, it's very hard and embarrassing for Tiffany to ask for help, and it's hard to know exactly when is the appropriate time to ask for help. But asking for help is the only way that she's going to be able to survive. She can't do this on her own. And as her community of friends, family, and fellow witches come together to defend her land from the fairies, she learns that sharing one's burden with other people may be the real definition of responsibility. Tiffany's critical thinking must also continue to sharpen in the Shepherd's Crown, as her perception of the world and her place in the world is called into question. Since the fairy queen Nightshade has been cast out of the fairy realm, she falls into Tiffany's care, powerless and angry. And it would be very easy for Tiffany to hold on to her old view, and to hate the fairy queen, or to kill this fairy queen. But instead, she takes care of her. She treats Nightshade like her apprentice, taking her out to take care of people, and although Nightshade is rude and she doesn't understand what Tiffany is doing, Tiffany has faith that she might be able to change. When they're out on the rounds, Nightshade questions why Tiffany does what she does, especially because it seems like she gets nothing in return. "You become a kind of servant," Nightshade sniffed, her delicate nose wrinkling. "Well, yes," said Tiffany, "but it doesn't matter, because one day I might need that person, and they will very probably help me. It works for us, it always has." "But you are powerful, though. You could rule the world," said Nightshade. "Really?" said Tiffany. "Why would I want to do that? I am a witch. I like being a witch. And I like people too. For every nasty person, there's a nice one. Mostly." She could have held onto her old view of the world and killed the queen, but she doesn't. Instead, she has the critical thinking skills to allow her to see how much change people are capable of, and she believes if she can change one fairy, she might be able to change them all. Tiffany is also confronted with change from Jeffrey, a boy who comes to her steading because he wants to be a witch. A man being a witch is absolutely unheard of. Men aren't supposed to be witches, they're supposed to be wizards. But Tiffany knows enough to know that just because something is unheard of doesn't mean that it should never be heard. Although Granny Weatherwax may have never let this kind of thing slide, and it's not how things were done in the past, that doesn't mean that it can't be how they're done in the future. Tiffany's greatest personal change may come in the form of her blossoming romance with a boy named Preston. The two of them met in I Shall Wear Midnight, and they're equally matched in so many ways. They both love wordplay, they're huge nerds, they both like to read books, they're both kind of outsiders. And perhaps most importantly, they are both desperately passionate about their chosen careers. Tiffany, of course, wants to be a witch and will be a witch no matter what it takes, and Preston is determined to become a doctor, to take care of people. The Shepherd's Crown sees the two of them separated and primarily communicating through letters because Preston is in the big city studying to be a doctor. And Tiffany is left wondering if she really wants to be with Preston because she also wants to be a witch and she doesn't know how to cope with these competing desires. She asks, "But why do I feel like this? I know a part of me does want to be with Preston, and it would make my family so happy. But I also want to be a witch, and I'm good at it. I know it's a terrible thing to say, but I measure myself against other witches, and I know I'm better than most of them when it comes to witchcraft. I can't not do it." As part of her process of moving on in the Shepherd's Crown, Tiffany has to completely reevaluate what she wants and who she is. It's an established fact that most witches don't have husbands. There isn't really the time or space for all of that nonsense, and Tiffany wants to be a witch, and she wants to be a really good witch. But she also wants to have human connection. She wants to have friends. She wants to have family. She wants to have love in her life. She wants to be a human. But is there really a way that she could be both? At the climax of the story, as the battle rages on, witches and old men and tiny blue men fighting against fairy armies, Tiffany stands alone, face to face with Peaseblossom. Using his fairy glamour, Peaseblossom impresses upon her all that she's lost, all the way that by now she's failed her own expectations. She wasn't able to take care of two steadings on her own. She failed to get the help of the Fairy King. Nightshade died under her care. Granny Weatherwax is gone. She stands alone, and she has realized that she will not be the person that she'd always dreamed of being as a child. Instead, she has to reach down into the depths of her bones to figure out the person that she really is. She was Tiffany Aching. Not Granny Weatherwax, but a witch in her own right. A witch who knew exactly who she was and how she wanted to do things, her way, and she had not failed because she had barely begun. The land under her feet was trembling, shaking like a wounded animal on a leash, yearning to be free. And the Shepherd's Crown was shining like a living thing in front of her. A shepherd's crown, not a royal one. A crown for someone who knew where she had come from. A crown for the lone lights zigzagging through the night sky, hunting for the single lost lamb. A crown for the shepherd who is there to herd away the predators. A crown for the shepherd who could work the best sheepdogs any shepherd could possibly have. A shepherd's crown. And she heard that voice. Tiffany Aching is the first among shepherds, for she puts others before herself. The king of shepherds. No, a queen. She felt the need to apologize to the crown, apologize for letting these elves come through and threaten this land, and so she said in a whisper, "I am Tiffany Aching, and my bones are in the chalk. Let the chalk be cleansed." Grieving is an important part of the journey of loss, but perhaps what's more important is what direction you choose to move on in. Tiffany never needed to figure out how to be Granny Weatherwax or her grandmother or anyone else. She needed to figure out what being herself looked like. The truest version of herself, the version of herself that could only be found through books on books of stumbling, failing, making mistakes, and learning how to be better, bit by bit. This was Terry Pratchett's final book, published just after he died. And I cannot imagine a more powerful punctuation to end this story. It is a great, beautiful command to do the work to figure out who you are, to change the world to be the place that you want it to be, and most importantly, to keep moving. These books work so well as YA because in each book you see Tiffany growing up, but Pratchett manages the stakes so that there is always going to be more growing up to do. At the end of The Shepherd's Crown, Tiffany finds peace not in landing on exactly who she is as a person, but in accepting that she will continue to change. She has changed, she is changing, and she will always be becoming something new. And that's a good thing. A young person reading these books will not feel condescended to, left with a blank version of a protagonist, just waiting for this coming-of-age story to imprint the instructions of adulthood upon the completely blank character. These books are just one example of a person's journey to becoming a young adult, and it leaves the room for the fact that everybody's journey is going to look different. One thing that Pratchett does so beautifully here, and in a lot of his works, is that he uses the tools available to him to confirm and subvert people's expectations. As Gideon Habercorn explains, humor can be seen as a playful process of noting that there is more than one way of looking at something, and then resolving the opposition. In humor, it is fun to change your script, if not your mind. At that point, those who follow the shift and discover the mistake get a chance to feel superior, if only to their own erring, pre-shifting selves. A mind that has learned how much fun can be had questioning its own assumptions will not be stopped that easily. But in the Tiffany Aching books, Pratchett uses our understanding, our near inherent understanding of the function of fairy tale tropes to further subvert expectations. Most children are gonna first learn about witches from a Roald Dahl book, or The Wizard of Oz, or a Disney movie, most of which are pretty monstrous witches. But Tiffany, the protagonist of this book, is a witch, a true witch, with the scary hat and all, but she is still good. She's not like Glinda the Good Witch kind of good, but we can see, because we are let into her mind, that she is making the right decisions, even as a witch. By casting his relatable, lovable, fascinating protagonist as something that is traditionally deemed monstrous, Pratchett calls into question what monstrosity really means, and perhaps opens children's mind to question more of their pre-assumed notions. He also beautifully parallels the fears and experiences of childhood with the tension felt by witches. Witches exist on these strange, scary borders of things. They're the ones called to make the really hard decisions, even when it's not clear what the right decision is, if there is a right decision at all. Witches are between life and death, between youth and adulthood, and this liminality is very similar to what a lot of children experience. Because they are young, everything in a child's life feels so much more intense than most adults would perceive it to be. The stakes are just much higher than most adults would assume. For a kid, the world is huge and incomprehensible and filled with things that they've only heard of and never seen, and yet they are forced to make choices every single day, choices that they don't understand the ramifications of, because they simply haven't seen enough of the world to be able to understand the extent of what is going on. But the witches also live in that liminal state, and it is in that liminality that they find their power. And so children too may be inspired to see their state of living on the edges, in the blurred gray areas of what it is to be human. Hopefully children will also be able to get power from that. Tiffany is every child that didn't quite fit in boxes. Every child that didn't just like giving the answer that the teacher thought was right, they wanted to find the answer that was true. The kind of kid that read too many books or didn't make friends very easily. In his lecture to Trinity College in 2010, Pratchett tells a story from his own childhood, when he was, as he says, educated above his age, bribed by his mother to read far more books than his third or fourth form teacher ever expected him to have read. And so, when the teacher asked the class where rain came from, Pratchett, fresh off of having read a book about the water cycle, raised his hand, was called upon, and he said that rain comes from the ocean, The whole class erupted in laughter because obviously rain comes from the sky. Tiffany is the embodiment of that too big for their body righteous rage that fuels so many 9-year-olds, and it shows how that precocious child may be able to become a precocious, powerful adult. And really, what better compost is there for a child's imagination than stories like this? A child cannot literally banish the monster of change or self-doubt, the monster of maturity, society, or loss with a lightning storm and a strongly worded speech. The real world isn't that neat. But in the safety of fantasy, they can find comfort, they can find hope, they can find the power to keep moving forward. G.K. Chesterton is quoted saying, "The objection to fairy tales is that they tell children there are dragons. But children have always known there are dragons. Fairy stories tell children that dragons can be killed." And the Tiffany Aching books beautifully demonstrate the power of that, taking on the fears of children with the seriousness that children feel these fears. I think that's why Sir Terry once said, "You can actually address in children's books issues that you probably wouldn't attempt to address in adult books." By the time most of us are adults, we've learned to cope with the horrors. We've learned, and we've had enough context to understand that a little bit of insecurity, a bit of an identity crisis, isn't going to be the end of the world. But a child has a much more limited scope. They have much less emotional intelligence, and so the crippling self-doubt that often just comes inherent with being a human being seems truly terrifying. And adult books just don't tend to dive into these primal fears with the gusto that young adult literature does. They're either busy trying to make really deep poetic points, or they're trying not to take themselves seriously so that they don't get written off as cringy. But there's a level of lacking self-awareness that can be really refreshing in young adult literature, because it is willing to take these more simple and fundamental fears with all of the seriousness that children encounter them with. And as adult readers of young adult literature can probably attest to, sometimes feeling those fears be addressed with the seriousness that your inner child feels them can be very rewarding no matter your age. YA literature does not need to be a monolith. In fact, I think that there should be a lot of variety in the genre, the scope, and the intent of the stories that we write for young readers. But to me, the Tiffany Aching books are one of the best examples of how a story can be entertaining, comforting, challenging, and uniquely educational using the tools provided by fantasy literature. I did not read these books when I was their target age. Of course, I wish I had. I think that they would have challenged me, changed me, and helped me love myself a lot better. But I did read these books when I was like 23 or 24, and that still counts as young adult, technically. I'm clinging to that. And that means I can attest to the transformative power of really good YA, no matter your age. No matter how old any of us are, we can still be growing, and we should still be growing. And these books are proof of that. No matter how much Tiffany grows up, she still has a lot more growing up to do. Not because she's a failure or because she's stunted, but because to be human is to change our minds, to change ourselves, to change the way that we think, and to constantly strive to be better. If you haven't gotten around to reading these books yet, just go read them. I know it seems like I just told you a lot about them, but I was not able to talk about most of the details from these books. I didn't even talk about the Feagles, whom the first book in this series are named after, so trust me when I say that these books are worth reading. No matter your age, no matter what you like to read, you should give them a try. But if you have read these books, go ahead and let me know which one is your favorite. I tend to lean towards I Shall Wear Midnight, just because I think it's a really damn good book, but I'm very curious to hear what other people have to say, so let me know what your favorite Tiffany Aching book is in the comments. Send this video to a friend that you want to make read this series, and go ahead and give this video a like if you enjoyed it, and consider subscribing if you want to tune in almost every week to hear me talk about storytelling, the Lord of the Rings, and the other kind of stuff that I like to talk about. Thank you so much for joining me this week, and I hope that you have a very happy, hobbity day.